Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Elena and I talk about books while the world is burning down. And hopefully you'll read alongside with me. I'd like to do commentary analysis because I'm a nerd. I also love to talk about disability and different things like that. So just expect eclectic videos from this channel. I know for a fact that there is a video that will come out that is actually a presentation I need to submit to a conference. So get ready for that. But today I want to do a video that I have been procrastinating on for a while. Not because I don't want to do it, but just because life has been a lot. I'm on the job market and I'm tired, I'm chronically ill, so I wanted to make sure I made justice to this topic because it is very sensitive, but I also think it's very important. And I might not be able to film all of what I want to do in one go, but that's okay. So if you see me coming back with a different outfit, don't worry. It's just me refusing to give up to or it's just me trying to if you see me come back with a different outfit, it's just me refusing to give in to the pressures of ableist late stage capitalism that says I have to be as efficient as possible to produce this video. So, what are we talking about today? We are talking about a book I read in February, Half His Age by Jennette McCurdy. All right. So, first things first. There are a lot of content notes about the book because of the topic. So the topic is, and this is not a spoiler, this is the whole point of the book, is a young woman, a young girl talking about being groomed by her high school teacher. So if that is something that is quite disturbing to you and triggering to you, please take care of yourself. You do not need to watch this or watch this with someone or talk to someone after watching it. Any kind of support that you need to address this topic. The book has received some backlash because of its graphic description of sexual encounters. And obviously, I will not read any of those today, but I do think that one of the reasons why I did want to make this video is that I want to argue that those passages, those explicit passages that elicit very strong emotions of disgust, are part of why I think this book is well written, and I think it's worth reading. So obviously this is the internet, so I have to put a disclaimer that nothing I will discuss today is me condoning or justifying an adult engaging in a romantic or sexual relationship with a person they are teaching, let alone a minor. There is the case that Waldo, the protagonist, starts off being 17 and then turns 18. That to me is kind of one category. So there's clearly grooming of a child happening here in someone's formative years. That is very serious. But as someone who has taught at university where people are of legal age, I still think the teacher-student relationship should be sacred, basically, and you should not engage in romantic or sexual relationships with your students, whether they are adults legally or not, because I think there's a power imbalance there that we need to acknowledge. So those are two separate things, but I am going to be talking about in this video how I liked McCurdy's depiction of Waldo's autonomy or individuation and some of that might seem like I'm saying, oh, well, she wanted it. I'm not saying that, in the sense that these are normal feelings that young people have, and especially feminine and like assigned female at birth people wanting to kind of take control, quote unquote, of your sexuality in regards to older men is, I think, a, if not universal, very, very common experience. And it's something that resonated deeply with me as someone who used to date men and who at 17 was in a relationship with someone 10 years older than me. So I want to be very careful to do something that the internet is not good at, which is nuance. When talking about, this is a story of abuse, this is a story of an imperfect victim, and it is the story of capitalism. So that's my big disclaimer up here. So if this is not at all a topic that you want to engage with, I completely agree. But also, just so you know, and I'm fully transparent, point, my argument is that this is a good book. This is a book that is worth reading. And the question that I have is this a book that should be recommended to young women and young men, perhaps also, so people of the age of the protagonist? And I'm not sure. But in case you are a young person who wants to read this book or has read this book, I'm hoping that this video can maybe help you work through some of the like important but very heavy themes that happen in the book, because it's the kind of thing that, you know, young people go through this. So there's an argument to be said, like, they should talk about it. We should talk about it with them. And so there's something for me, a 33-year-old, to read this now and look back and identify, oh, yeah, now I see how messed up I was when I was 17. But if you had given me this book at 17 with no context, would have I understood? Would I have just been grossed out? Would I have just found this protagonist like really unlikable and like put the book down? So that is a question I still have. I do believe there is space for books like this. I'm just right now not sure who the audience should be. And to be clear, Jennette McCurdy did not market this as YA. So it's not meant for kind of teenagers. However, I think it's a really important topic to discuss when we are teaching young people about consent, about desire, about exploring their sexuality in a safe way. I think, you know, I grew up in an era of Pretty Little Liars where a student teacher relationship is literally endgame in that, you know. That was completely normalized. And, you know, a bit before my time, Dawson's Creek, a big plot line is a student being abused by his teacher. And then when he talks about it, he's the one who's punished about that. So we've been talking about these relationships and giving them a pass or glorifying them or glamorizing them. And I want to say that this book does not do that. So if you think that discussing graphic sexual scenes makes it glamorizing, I don't know if this will change your mind, but I will try and make the case that as a whole, this book brings up important themes, treats them with, I'm not going to, tenderness and compassion in many ways. So without further ado, I will start my presentation. All right, so Half His Age by Jennette McCurdy. Let's talk about it. So what kind of an educator would I be if I didn't have an outline telling you what we're going to do? So, my big point is that this book is good at showing, not telling, the impact of abuse. I will not be going point by point about the story. Obviously, there will be spoilers, but I would argue this is not a book that relies on twists or anything happening in the plot that, it doesn't matter. Not that it doesn't matter. Let me say this again. Okay. This book doesn't rely on twists. It's not really important how it ends. I mean, it is thematically, but, the important part is that you follow Waldo as she experiences these things. So I will be discussing spoilers. I will not give you a play-by-play. If you would want a full in-depth review that way, I do recommend Savvy Writes books. She really covered it very well. So she reads lots of excerpts from the book. I would recommend you go there. I have not seen it yet, but I also saw that Read with Cindy did a comparison of like who addressed this topic the best, comparing it to My Dark Vanessa, Lolita, other things like that. So I can't vouch for that video because I haven't seen it, but I trust Cindy. So if you do want a kind of like comparison video, go with Cindy, and if you want a like play-by-play, go with Savvy. All right. So this book, I believe, does a lot of showing, not telling, of the impact of abuse, which is something that we take for granted sometimes, but is hard to do in writing because you're literally telling. But this book, I think McCurdy has a really strong voice, and it allows her to address these themes, but not in a kind of pedantic or kind of preachy way. So one of the themes under that is autonomy and parentification. So the kind of polar tension points of Waldo being a child, essentially, but having had to take on a lot of kind of responsibilities, and like how she finds in this relationship a way to be taken care of and to kind of relinquish some of those responsibilities while, in a sense, asserting her autonomy as a 17-18-year-old. The themes of power and powerlessness, so that's also linked. Late stage capitalism, we have to talk about it. I have a couple of critiques, and then I'm trying out to see if we like them, some segments. So maybe these can come back if I do other books in the future. So let's judge a book by its cover, where we discuss the cover of Half His Age, and maybe compare it to other covers. And I just really have fond memories. I used to have a French textbook. For context, I was homeschooled and in Quebec, and so a lot of my textbooks were in French, and these were actually textbooks from France. And so it was like a French language textbook, but at the end of every chapter, there was an art analysis exercise. So they had a painting that somehow related to the theme of that chapter. And I really enjoyed that. And so I am not an art historian, nor am I a graphic designer, but I think it would be fun to like practice image analysis skills. And yeah, so I titled this, Let's Judge a Book by Its Cover. And so maybe we can do that with other books. And then this makes me think of, and like my brain goes in like lots of different directions, but I always have a book I want to recommend. And I thought this was like a sneaky way to bring in books that I really want to talk about, that like maybe, won't have like a big splash, like a Jennette McCurdy's debut, right? So that's a way for me to subvert the trend and sneak in a book that maybe would not be popular. And then 5, ending up with who am I recommending this to? So I honestly don't know what I'm going to say for that. Because as I stated, like, I don't know if I would recommend this to a child or like a teen. I don't know if I would recommend it being done in a high school. I mean, I don't think it would ever be done in a high school because the book banners would be out with their pitchforks. But like in a I could see this like in a gender studies college class. Like I think it warrants discussion, but I don't know what I'm going to say there. So, showing not telling. So, I argue that it is obvious the toll that this relationship takes on Waldo. Now, I have tried to identify specific reasons for why I think it's obvious, but it might not be obvious to everyone else. So, this is how I experienced it. So, there is the basic level, the first person point of view. So, we are in Waldo's head. This is not being voyeuristic from Mr. Corgi, the abuser, like looking at her. This is all about how she looks at him, she sees herself, she imagines he sees her. Like we're from her perspective, so we get to experience her feelings, her fears, her anxieties as we go through this. So it is not a tale of like someone looking at a young girl and being like, oh, she's so seductive and blah blah blah. It comes off differently when you're like, oh, I try to be seductive and like wear a blazer and like Oxford shoes, but then I find that's too preppy and like I need to like change. It's all her idea of what she thinks an older man wants out of a younger woman. So even all of the time, and this is a big part of the book, Waldo spends a lot of time preparing her body with her clothes, with her makeup, with her waxing and her hygiene rituals, to be presentable, acceptable to this gross man. And that is another thing. So we are in her head for all of that. So I think that matters. But then what I'm calling the crude portrayals of feminine rituals for the male gaze. So I think the book really does a good job at showing us that the line can get blurry between like, oh, I'm doing it for a man or I'm doing it for myself. Because one of the things that happens in Waldo's life is like she kind of has a shopping addiction. And so when she's like spiraling out, especially at night, she'll go like binge shopping. And it just so happens like she'll buy a lot of things that are like promoted to women, like makeup, like waxing strips and things like that, and like hair curlers and shampoos and all sorts of things like that. And so I think this portrayal, even though it is crude, and I'm reminded, I don't know if anyone has seen Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, but there is a whole song called the Sexy Getting Ready song, where it's basically about like the torture women are expected to put their bodies through to prepare for a date where a man shows up in like sweats.
A scary movie or something, like some nasty ass patriarchal bullshit. You know what? I gotta go apologize to some bitches. I'm forever changed after what I just seen.
And this is basically what happens here. Like Mr. Corey with zero effort into this, and she puts so much effort and it consumes so much of her time to think about how much she's going to prepare for him, and then to prepare for him only for him half the time to cancel to be with his wife and child, because that's how it is. So I think, far from glamorizing it, I think this like involves a level of banality and like grinding pain and violence, in a sense, of what you're doing to yourself. And how, yes, it is about wanting to please a man, but it's also like a deep dissatisfaction and a sense of powerlessness with herself, and like doing these things gives you a sense of power. Like I put off doing this video because I was like, I don't have the energy or the will to put on any makeup, and this is going to go on the internet. And then I was like, but that shouldn't stop me from doing it. And so I compromised and I put on some dark lipstick today. I was just like, I'm just gonna do this because it helps me put myself there. Is that completely separate from my apprehension at the idea of being perceived and of being told I look tired and old and ugly? And no, it's not. But also, I feel like when I need to do something where I'm presenting, it is helpful for me to put on some makeup because it allows me to like, it's a ritual. It's a way to like signal to myself, okay, now we're on. So all that to say is that I think that as much as people harp on or take issue with the sexual scenes that are portrayed very crudely, I think we have to place that in context of other aspects of like bodily discipline that are also crudely portrayed and unglamorously shown to us. And then the third thing about the showing not telling is like the commitment to portraying an imperfect victim. So this is a case again where I find like the realism really helped the story. You know, Waldo is a vulnerable child, but she's not a vulnerable child like is maybe like imagined in like social work policy. And this is no shade to social workers, but this is what a lot of my work has been, is like, how do you recognize autonomy in vulnerability? How do you not wait for someone to be like completely actualized, completely rational, completely like healed before you recognize their autonomy? And so I do think that Waldo, you know, Waldo pursues this man. This man is extremely passive and like does not do his job in the sense of like he should be saying no to this. But she does pursue him. She does, for a while, find some kind of comfort or care with him. And I think it was brave to portray that because then you open yourself up to the accusations of like, well, Waldo wanted this, she was an equal participant, it was mutual abuse, like all of these things. And I think it's possible to say, no, this was an abusive relationship. This man took advantage of her. And she was a young person individuating, trying to understand her own desires, both sexual and personal and in life, and like where she fits into the world. And there is an element of agency there. And so I think that McCurdy did a good job of refusing to like give us like a morality tale of like a pure virginal, you know, young woman who was ensnared by a manipulative man. On the contrary, I think Mr. Corgi is portrayed as just like very banal, very mediocre, like extremely mediocre. And that is also important because it just shows it's not, you know, the super jacked gym bros or like finance bros or the like Christian Grey types in real life that perpetrate this kind of harm. They are like extremely mediocre white men. Well, not just white. That just came out Freudian slip. But extremely mediocre men who have no desire to address their own dissatisfaction in life and turn to someone who will just lap up all of their attention. And as the book progresses, you can see as a reader, at least I, as an adult woman, can see how manipulative he is becoming. But you can also see how that would have been gradual to someone in the situation like Waldo. So I do think that McCurdy successfully shows and not tells in that sense. So the autonomy and parentification. So briefly, Waldo lives with her single mom, and from a young age, Waldo is basically in charge of the household. Her mom is like a serial dater, is kind of flighty, has a hard time like keeping down a job, will like has probably some like mental health issues where like sometimes she'll be so depressed she can't get up and go to her job. And so it's kind of like Waldo's job to keep up the house. And so Waldo ends up feeding herself. She ends up paying for bills. So from a young age, Waldo is parentified. And this like weight of responsibility is placed in stark contrast with her best friend Franny, who's from like a wealthy Mormon family, who are like very close and do a lot of like the traditional Mormon things of like hanging out as a family and doing all of that. Um, and Waldo spends a lot of time kind of separating her life, her home life, from her relationship with Franny. Franny like never comes, and Waldo once like goes to church with Franny and her family, and she hears a sermon about like how it's the Mormon duty to like befriend the poor and have acts of charity, and it dawns on her, whoa, I am Franny's act of charity. And so that's her understanding of her place in the world, which leads to when someone either says or acts around you like, oh, you're mature for your age, that is the curse. That is like, this is, we're primed here to be, feel like special. So on one hand, Waldo has been parentified. She has way too many responsibilities for someone her age. She is basically a carer for her mother, emotionally and financially. And so when someone is like, oh, I see you, I see how strong and how special you are. And I think that you're really smart and bright. And this is exactly what Mr. Corgi does in a very gross way, because he responds to her writing about basically childhood trauma and then says like, you're so amazing, you're such a good writer, blah blah blah. And this is where his interest in her starts, because she makes herself vulnerable in a class assignment, which is, I mean, genius of McCurdy for choosing this as an inciting incident, basically, but completely perverse and awful. And so there is that where you're like, Waldo places so much emphasis on like, I see him, he sees me. Like there is this deep understanding. And with Franny, Waldo realizes, okay, even the person I thought that was closest to me, I am just like a pity case. This is a pity friendship. And so I do not see myself seen between my peers. And this is with like Franny with another girl, but also like she doesn't feel seen with the teenage boys that she sleeps with and dates either, and she doesn't feel like she sees them. So it's very much this idea of like, okay, I'm marginalized, I'm a child who is not a child because I have so many responsibilities, but I'm also like not part of the world of my peers. And then here comes an older man who tells me I'm special, and like not like other girls in that sense. And so I think her asserting her autonomy and her agency in deciding like, I'm attracted to this man, I will pursue him, I think comes from very much this sense of powerlessness and the need for recognition. So I've covered this a little bit, but this idea that, you know, Waldo doesn't want a boyfriend. Waldo wants to be seen, and she doesn't even know who she is yet and what she wants them to see. But she wants to be seen. She wants this connection. She wants to be taken care of. She wants to be important to someone. Her mother keeps like neglecting her to go off with boyfriends who mistreat her. Like she's alone a lot of the time. She knows she's not a priority for Franny. She doesn't feel like she wants to spend time with a lot of her peers. And so this need for recognition primes her to be a prey to Mr. Corgi, who sees like, oh, this is a young woman who I can pretend with, that I didn't take the choices and the path that I did, and like got married and moved to Alaska and like had a child and given up my writing career. The fact that Mr. Corgi is a failed writer is just like almost too much. But It is also perfect because again, I know this man. I know this man. And they're like, oh, the novel I never wrote, and oh, I used to be an autiste, and now I'm a boring suburban dad, and you're just like, I, at my big age right now, I have no patience for this. I'm just like, dude, if you're not happy in your marriage, leave your wife. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, or if writing your novel is really important, set aside time to do that. Like, yes, he's married and he has a young child, but like, they're not in any financial difficulties as much as we can see. Like, if you want to write a novel, write a novel. Like, I don't know. This whole like, oh, my misspent potential. I've been tied down. I was like, I have no respect for that. But I see how that can be appealing to a 17-year-old who is like, I'm here. I can be free. I can be your sexy mistress. Like, I can be your bit on the side. Like, you can have fun with me. And a lot of the book is Waldo being like, I always say it's okay when his wife calls. And I'm like, I'm always understanding when he has to cancel to go pick up his son. Like, I am here. I play the role in his life where I'm there to bring him like comfort and joy and excitement. And, this makes me think of the Lana Del Rey song, The Other Woman, her apartment will always be clean. She'll always like have her hair done and her makeup done. Like, it's a really important part of the power imbalance that happens here is that Waldo is so much wanting of this recognition, and she doesn't know, as I said, like, she doesn't know who she wants other people to see. So she's projecting herself in this idea that what she thinks he wants of her. And it turns out it is true. Like, as soon as she starts pushing back and saying, like, hey, can you please not take calls from your wife while we're at dinner, he does not take it well. So she is correct in some sense. But, like, at this stage, like, it's really this need for recognition. And then I put this idea of passivity, anger, and power. And so I've already said Mr. Corgi is extremely passive. Like, he acts as though, like, this thing just happened. And which is extremely cowardly and also denies his part of agency in all of this. Like, I'm sorry, you have to choose to drive over to her house. You have to choose to sleep with her. You have to, like, all of these things are not, forced on you by anyone. So, again, for me, like, that is gross in and of itself. Like, this whole, like, I'm just a man existing. I can't. But then linked with, like, Waldo's anger. And I remember I would date men when I was younger, not because I wanted to or, like, desired them in any way, but because I had been felt powerless. I'm not going to go into details, but, like, a lot of women and folks I have experienced SA, and, like, sometimes, like, taking charge of your sexuality is a big way. And so, like, this idea of, like, I think Waldo's desire for Mr. Corgi is, like, desperation and anger. And when you realize, when you have a young teenage female body, which, as we've seen, like, this is also why I thought it was really important to discuss this book in the wake of the Epstein files. Like, this idea of, like, you discover that you have power, like, just by existing, basically. You have, quote unquote, power over these men who keep telling you, oh, I couldn't stay away, and, like, all of... I'm getting really riled up. But it is this idea, like, it's your idea of power. Like, you think you have power over people when they say, like, oh, I have to cheat on my wife with you. Like, you're so beautiful. That's intoxicating, especially to someone who doesn't feel seen. And this idea that, someone you think is, like, more cultured and intellectual and worldly than you, wants you, sees you. And is like drawn and cannot stay away. Like you don't see that as like lack of morals and principles and any kind of common sense. You see that as I have power. I have power over this man. And that I think is a big driver of this book. And I think there's a whole analysis that can be done about like Waldo exploring desire and what does desire mean. Okay, so my last point about this is the late stage capitalism. I've already mentioned binging, like binge shopping and retail therapy. Like whenever Waldo like feels overwhelmed or bored or like alone, she turns to just like buying crap on Temu and Amazon, and like she's very aware that this is not filling her void. Like there's a self-awareness about like these are not quality products. Most of the clothes don't fit. Some of the clothes are like what she thought she wanted to be, but then when she tries them on, it doesn't like fit her vibe. And so she's like experimenting with how she wants to present. Well, she also buys like beauty products that promise to like tame her hair, and like she has like issues with her body image, which is again is very common for human beings, but especially teen girls who are, you know, told they should fit a specific mold. And I think there is also the result. There's a really nice passage, and I think Savvy covers it, where, you know, Waldo is scrolling and she sees, you know, pictures of cute animals, 9/11 conspiracies, bombings, more like ads for makeup, like a true crime story, like, and this experience of the internet we have now, where like everything is like in our phone and it's so close to us, and like she results like she just buys things. But the thing is, she buys things to perform the feminine labor of like not only presenting for Mr. Corgi, but like, and this is a spoiler, like he does leave his wife for her, which is statistically improbable. But in terms of like the plot of the book is interesting, in terms of, like, he leaves his wife for her and then he expects her to be at his disposal, even though like once he leaves his wife, I think he also leaves his job, or I don't know if he was discovered, but anyway, he doesn't have a job. And so he's at home and he cooks and he cleans a lot. So in that sense, he's like, oh, well, he's doing like all of the like domestic labor. But no, he expects her to be his emotional anchor, to always be there, to always laugh at his jokes, to always like want to listen to him. But she has a job. Like she, you know, doesn't have like alimony or whatever, or like savings or things. Like she cannot be there and perform that labor. So that's a point in the narrative where it shifts between like her like disciplining her body to him wanting to discipline her emotions, and provide that labor. And why I put this in the late stage capitalism is because it's a loop, because she can't afford to buy all that crap on Temu. She doesn't have a job, and her job is what? Victoria's Secret. So I think this was again a very smart choice for Jennette McCurdy. So Victoria's Secret is a lingerie brand. It was like big in the 90s and early 2000s. You know, the Victoria's Secret Angels, you know, Tyra Banks was famously one of them. So obviously a very kind of like sexualized company, but also like promoting some kind of like sexual liberation for women, and like, yeah, wear lingerie for you, blah blah blah. So there are those themes going there, but also the CEO, I'm gonna say allegedly, I'll double check, but like was accused of like sexual misconduct and things like that. So the fact that Waldo is involved with Mr. Corgi, and to like please him keeps buying these things that she then has to go to Victoria's Secret to sell bras to women so she can do it, is like for me a whole other like framework of how late stage capitalism is part of this web of vulnerability. So obviously grooming has always happened as long as humans have existed, but I think the fact that makes this book very timely. And I don't know how it will age because there's lots of like references to companies and apps and things like that. But I think it is a good way to tell the story in our age right now, and to see how the structures of capitalism really shape the specific interaction. All right, so I have a couple of critiques. They're not that big, in the grand scheme of things. As I said, like, I enjoyed this book. I know it sounds weird to say, but like I thought it was well written. I was not disappointed about Jennette McCurdy's voice and writing, which was a big thing I was looking forward to. And so I would say like I was not disappointed. I thought she had a strong voice. I would say my cat is like having the zoomies. So I don't know if you can hear that. It's being very loud. Yes, Daisy, very loud. Um ugh. But yes, so I would say one of the critiques is the ending. The ending was very abrupt. And this, I think, is a pitfall of a lot of debut novels. I read one recently. I think it was called The Eyes Are the Best Part. It's kind of like a horror, like magical realism novel. And yeah, the ending was really abrupt. And it was the same with Half His Age. Like, I think a bit more like refining could have been done, or like even add a few more pages. It's not a very long book, and like some of the chapters are like 1 or 2 pages. It's like one of those like very quick paced books. And so yeah, I would say it has debut novel syndrome in that sense. I think debut novels can either go, for me, like very pretentious. So I would say Martyr, which I really enjoyed, was extremely pretentious. But it was a kind of pretensions that matched my pretension. So my pretentiousness. So in that sense, I really enjoyed it. But like it was a very like, this is literary fiction. And then you have things like Half His Age, which is like, we're going to be very sparse. We're very, very quick. We're going to like have short attention span. We're going to have like quick chapters. And then we're going to stop. And then you're left, okay. It has a kind of like, I finished my essay at 3 a.m. before the deadline kind of vibe. And not saying that the quality of writing is bad, but it was just abrupt. And so, but I think this is something you can easily work on. And so I would read a second novel. Okay, 1 second. I have to free my cat. Go to the light. And the second one is, this book is set in Alaska. Alaska plays little to no role in this whole story. And I will say, like, it's not a major critique in the sense that the story functions without it. But it is a critique in the sense that you could have situated this book basically anywhere that wasn't a major city. Because one of, like, Mr. Corgi's gripes is like, oh, I moved away, there's no culture here, blah, blah, blah. Which, like, I understand. Like, as someone, like, I prefer to live in cities. I prefer to be able to walk to my library and have a theater nearby, be able to, you know, go see shows and have museums. Like, that is my preference. So that's fine. But, like, you could have done that basically in anywhere. And I guess, like, McCurdy would have said it in the US, but, like, anywhere in the US that is not a huge metropolitan city. So why it was set in Alaska is a bit confusing to me if you're not going to use the setting. And that's where, like, it's a bit disappointing that we don't really have a sense of place. There's a few lines about, like, the midnight sun and things like that. But, like, why bother to set in Alaska if it's not going to have a role? And then this is This is very nitpicky, but I grew up in Canada in a place where it snows and it gets cold in the winter. And obviously Alaska is like a lot more north than where I lived. And Waldo and Mr. Corey hang out in cars in the winter way too much to be believable. Like, sure, you can keep the engine running to keep the heating on, but I feel like that was an oversight. Like, it's clearly Jennette McCurdy has lived in California, like Southern California, for too long. It's like no one's hanging out in cars in the middle of the Alaskan winter. Anyway, so those are like very small gripes, like the abrupt ending and the kind of lack of sense of place in this novel. But saying this, like, those two things do not affect the effectiveness of the message or the writing. So these are just things to like maybe keep in mind for next time. But no big deal.
A few moments later.
All right, I'm back. It is daytime, and I'm wearing my clownfish jumper. So, are you ready to judge a book by its cover? Let's do it. Just a reminder, I'm doing this just for fun, just so we can like practice our art critique together. I'm not an art historian or, a graphic designer. But I think it is our God-given right to us all to appreciate the visual medium if we can. So I'm looking at Half His Age by Jennette McCurdy. So we have that on what I assume is the left side of your screen here. So this way. So we have a very prominent close-up of what looks like a femme, like sucking on their maybe middle finger. It looks like they have very plump lips, and it's a very like coral kind of lip color. You kind of see up the nose, and the nails are very manicured in like a very specific kind of artistic, trendy way. What looks like kind of trembling fuchsia flames with white tips. They're gorgeous. I absolutely love these nails. And I think it is a really good indication of maybe like the age of this person. So we'll get back to that. The overall color, like obviously it's mostly like skin tone, like fleshy pinks, it's a white woman, or and then the back is kind of this like old rose lilac color, kind of like the color that I put in the presentation. I like it, but it does remind me a bit of my aunt's like laundry room, the kind of wallpaper that would be up. So it's definitely like femme coded colors and these like purples and pinks, but it is a bit more like cool and toned down. So it's not like a bright Barbie pink, for example. It's not giving us like child, but it is giving femme. Okay, so if we compare this to the Lolita cover, which is in the middle, so obviously there are many, many different kinds of covers for Lolita. I actually found one which was a close-up of a mouth. So maybe that is what Half His Age is trying to reference there. But I chose this color of Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov because it is probably the most famous one. And so just so you know, like all the books I have on screen right now are all books about grooming in some way or another. So Lolita shows, again, I like femme person, which we can't see their hair, so they do look bald in this picture, which I think is an interesting choice. And they're kind of, at least in this cover, in a kind of pink fog, so we can't see like their chin below, but that might be because the cover is of like an old paperback and it's been like sun bleached. But clearly they have the iconic like red rimmed heart shaped sunglasses, and they're sucking on a like pink red lollipop and kind of like peering over the sunglasses. So this, I say iconic, not in a neutral sense, iconic in the sense that these are recognizable as Lolita glasses. A lot of pop stars and people have like replicated this look over the years, and this kind of like, I think it's interesting that the eyes are a part of this picture, and it's this kind of like looking possibly suggestively above your eyes. Lolita is a child. Lolita is not, you know, trying to attract men in that way, but like this is the perception that people have of Lolita. And even though Nabokov like said he wrote this book to be like, look at how gross the groomers are, the way that this cover is portrayed with the kind of like clouds in the background of the title of Lolita, the like pink fog, and the fact that this person has like a what looks like a lollipop but could look like a tongue like in their mouth and looking over heart-shaped sunglasses gives a much more like glamorized view. So I will say, like with the nails in Half His Age and the like glasses in the Lolita, we do have the glam factor. So those are two things that are in common. The difference I would say is like in Half His Age there are no eyes. So this is the kind of like depersonalization. In a way, I think it is noteworthy that it is the middle finger that is being sucked on, which obviously can be suggestive, but can also be like an FU in that sense, and that we go up the nose. So like I would say generally, like if I would take a picture of myself like up my nose, I wouldn't choose that to put forward. So I think having read the book, this kind of links to the like crude depictions of what happens in the book. So we have that dichotomy of like we have the glam, we have the on trend, and possibly like how much work and money Waldo spends on beautifying herself. And so it would be very accurate for her to have these kinds of nails. So this idea of like the glam, but also kind of the grossness is at the forefront. And then we have on the right side a like grayscale black and white cover of My Dark Vanessa, which is again another book I have not read, but like that is about grooming, and about like the negative, like the harms that causes. And we see this is a stark contrast to the other two. So it's in black and white. It says I'm serious. We have like a girl's like face again with her eyes closed, and then a hand over part of her face and like a black moth or butterfly on top of it. So we have the butterfly that could symbolize kind of innocence and youth, but the black color like maybe like brings about ideas of like doom and death as well. The fact that this person has their eyes closed again is they're not engaging the viewer directly. They're kind of maybe being passive or kind of not, or being dead or being sad, or like it's a kind of very contemplative pose. The lips are still prominent, but the fact that half of the face is actively covered makes me think, oh, okay, this is a bit like, this is not all there is to see. So this person clearly has some kind of mascara on, if not a fake lash. So there's also an attempt at grooming here, but definitely this cover to me says like this is a dark and serious book compared to the other two. So I honestly think the Lolita cover is kind of terrifying. personally, but that might be like the alien-esque version of like not seeing the hair there and like the pink fog that's everywhere. And Half His Age is definitely very provocative. um I would say My Dark Vanessa's cover is the most humanizing, and I think that is probably also the purpose of the book. We see most of like a human femme face, um and we see them kind of in a vulnerable position. Whilst Lolita is meant to be suggestive, and so is Half His Age. Those are like all very different choices for all these like different topics. So I would say personally, I really like the cover of Half His Age. I think it gives you a good indication of what to expect in the book. It is provocative. It is sometimes crude. It is also like a bit flippant. You know, Waldo is a pretty like cool girl teenager, and as much as she is being abused by this grown man, she does have some spunk, and so I think the sucking of the middle finger is appropriate here. And I do think the nail art really clinches this as a moment in history, right? So in the similar way, the Lolita glasses evoke a specific era. I think in 20 years, looking back on the nails on the Half His Age cover, that will give us like an indication of like the 2010s, 2020s, 2020s, I would say more like 2020s. And I think that is okay because, as I mentioned before, there are things that will probably date the book, like references to specific apps, and things and companies like Temu, that might not exist in the future. But I think that is fine. I think it's okay to be anchored in a specific time and place. And I do think Half His Age did a better job at anchoring in time than in place. But all that to say, I really like the cover. I think it is a true indication of what to expect in the book. And I can see how people looking at this might be like, this book is glamorizing like grooming and abuse. But that's where I say you have to read the book. So once you've judged the cover, then you have to look at that, because a lot of the glamour aspect is like broken down into thinking about like, what is the cost of, you know, spending so much on your manicure, or, you know, spending hours preparing to meet a man who's just going to cancel last minute because he has responsibilities as a father and a husband. So there is a touch of glamour in this cover, I will admit, but I don't think people should infer that this book glamorizes student-teacher relationships because of that. That's all I'm going to say. Okay, so this book reminds me of another book. And so this is just really an excuse for me to talk about one of my favorite books. It is loosely related, but hear me out. So, Indian Horse by Richard Wagamese is a beautiful novel. I think in comparison with Half His Age, well, there are similar topics. It is about CSA, unfortunately. But it's specifically around the harm done to Indigenous youth in residential schools in Canada. So, obviously, very different from the student teacher abuse in Half His Age. But it's another example of like a difficult topic of child CSA, and other kind of child abuse. And it is similar, the prose is similar in the sense that both Wagamese and McCurdy tend towards a more sparse kind of prose, so it's not overly flourished. And I think that is a good choice for this kind of topic because it allows us, I don't know how to quite capture it, but there is more space for like tenderness in a very difficult setting when we're not being very purpley. And I will admit I do love a purple prose, but I think Wagamese and McCurdy, while not being exactly the same and not having the same tone at all, really use that kind of sparse prose to like paint a picture of the actual emotional impact of what is happening. And I said like here it's like uncomfortably emotional, where like half his age is, it's mostly like in its crudeness that it might make us uncomfortable. And the fact that Waldo keeps calling this man Mr. Corgi, even in intimate settings, like that's like revolting, and very uncomfortable in that way. But you also see like how it's affecting Waldo. In Indian Horse, we see like the impact of the like stay in a residential school when these children, and specifically one young boy, has been abducted from his parents, and like years later, and what looks like a complex relationship to a specific person at that school and the game of hockey. So I never thought I would care about a book about hockey. And I know like books about hockey romances are like really big right now and they're just not for me. But the role of the game of hockey in this book allows Wagamese to really explore some uncomfortable relations where you're like, sometimes like the place where we seek comfort is also where we receive the most harm, or that like harm happens within a setting where we also experience joy and community. And like it's a very yeah, I don't want to give away too much about the book because I think you really should experience it for yourself, but I think in a very different way from Half His Age, like this book tackles in a beautiful way a very harrowing topic. And similarly to what like McCurdy is doing, like building off her own experience and like the part finding the universal in the particular, the harms that were done to Indigenous children and their families through the residential school program is a real thing. So this is a novel, but it really is important to talk about these stories. And I cannot recommend Indian Horse more. Obviously, content notes, like it is about dealing with the trauma of CSA. So keep that in mind. And also, again, it is referencing real life events. Like these things did happen to children. There are people alive today still living with that trauma. And so obviously keep that in mind when you read this. But I really wish more people would read it. It's a gorgeous book about a very, very important and difficult topic. All right, so I'm ending this with who am I recommending this to? And I've had a bit of time to think about it. I will say, I think the audience is adult women. And so I do think I do recommend it to most adult women, with all the caveats about the content warnings that I've given before. Let me just check actually. There are no content warnings in the book, which I think is interesting. Maybe they thought people who pick this up will know what it's about and that's enough. I think maybe in future editions they should include them. I think that is some oversight from the publisher. But so yes, notwithstanding all of the content warnings, I would recommend this to most adult women. I think this is a very good book club book, because I think people should maybe not be alone with it, in the sense of like they should have an outlet to talk to trusted people, not just like on the internet to strangers, because I think this is very sensitive. So if you have a book club that you trust, I do recommend this. It's also, pretty quick to read. So it's not going to be like heavy in that sense, but it might be heavy in the topics that you discuss. Again, I would recommend you discuss it with people you trust, and not just, walk up to any like library group or anything like that. Maybe, I mean, do whatever you want. But yeah. I also wish, if there are men out there listening to this, I don't think so, but if men would have like read this with a friend or a buddy, or in like run a book club with mostly men, I think this would be interesting to discuss. I hesitate to say that like women should discuss it with men. Again, this is like a personal decision about you. But I think having men read this and take the time to analyze it, again, offline with a group of trusted people, might be good. I just don't feel like I can recommend women subject themselves to doing that work. I mean, if you so feel called, if you feel moved by the spirit to do that kind of advocacy, by all means. But I would really encourage, when we say like deal with your own stuff, men, this is a kind of thing that, again, not difficult to read, and like maybe sit with how it makes you feel and talk about it with your friends. Maybe that's too much to ask, but I do think that. And regarding reading it with young people, well, young people might pick it up. Like, I remember picking up books that I was too young to read, and then traumatizing me, and to this day I remember. But that is not, we don't have to do that in a vacuum. So I would say, like, if a young person around you does read it, be open to talking about it with them. And if you're a mother or an aunt and are close with like a 17, 18-year-old, you might suggest that you read it together. I don't think this will ever make it to a classroom. And honestly, I don't know how safe that would be. But I do think we need to normalize talking about these topics with young people, other than through kind of teen dramas on television. That's it. I don't have, yeah. So my caveat is heed the content warnings. Read it in a supportive environment. I encourage men to read it and talk about it with other men. And then maybe once you filter that through, maybe like discuss it with the women in your life that have read it, because I think everyone should be able to share their thoughts on it. But I think, like, given the content, maybe like filter your initial like reactions and emotional reception of the book before you burden women with your thoughts. Okay. And so that is it for me. Have you read Half His Age? Is it on your radar at all? Will you opt to not read it for any reason? Just like let me know. Also, have you read Indian Horse? If you have, please let me know. I want to talk about it with everyone. But yeah, so this is my first full review. Um, who knows if I will make more, but I really enjoyed talking about this. I think it is an important book as a conversation starter, and I am excited to see what Jennette McCurdy writes next because I do enjoy her voice. And that is it for Spinoodler Reads or Reading with Spinoodler or whatever I'm calling this channel. And please like and subscribe and share it with a friend who is also interested in Half His Age. Bye!